Hello everyone, today I'm gonna explain how I made several semi-custom power-ups in Super Mario Bros. Wonder. The reason I'd call them semi-custom is because I haven't done anything complicated to achieve this. These things are super duper simple edits of the bubble flower, I just changed which projectiles the power-up produces. If that rings a bell, you may have seen the YouTube short I made about this very thing some time ago. The reason I'm making a longer video about custom power-ups now is because recently a method was discovered to circumvent some of the problems I originally encountered when trying to make these things work. But before we get to that, I guess I should catch the people who haven't watched the short up on how exactly this trick is pulled off. So to start, how does a vanilla power-up like the bubble flower work? Well, what happens when the player shoots a bubble is that the player actor's programming calls for a bubble, which is called bullet shabon, to be created as a child actor of the player. Since it's the parent actor, the player can transfer some information to the bubble, such as its movement direction and momentum. So as you've probably guessed, making a fully fledged custom power-up can be as simple as making the player actor produce a different projectile by changing which child actor it spawns. In fact, this is exactly how newer Super Mario Bros. Wii's version of the hammer suit was made. The mod developers copied the code of one of the vanilla projectile power-ups and made it so instead of spawning a fire or ice ball, it spawns the version of the hammer projectile that Yoshi can spit out. And in the case of Super Mario Bros. Wonder, we don't even have to mess with the game's code to do something similar. Since the game calls for the actor named Bullet Shabon to be spawned when you shoot a bubble, all we have to do to make the player shoot something different is copy that actor's file and rename it to Bullet Shabon. This makes the game think the player is still spawning the bubble actor as always, when in fact the internals of the actor have been entirely replaced, causing it to load a different model and different code. So we can have a lot of fun using this simple trick. For example, something I also demonstrated in that short is that by replacing the bubble actor with the cloud platform actor, we can make a janky version of the cloud flower. This doesn't feel polished in the slightest, but it is surprisingly usable. Something else that I thought might be funny is making the power-up produce vines. I guess this kinda makes for a vertical version of the grapple vine badge. Now, you might be wondering, instead of spawning platforms or vines, why not make the power-up shoot something with offensive power? Well, let's see what happens when I make the bubble flower spawn spike balls. Yeah, you can see the problem. Whereas the actors that the vanilla power-ups produce were made to only damage enemies and not the player, the same isn't the case for almost any other offensive actor throughout Super Mario Bros. Wonder. Though one trick that does kinda work is making a shell shooting power-up. Because these things get spawned halfway inside the collision of the player, the shells get kicked away immediately, making for a pretty usable ability. Of course, it is also very easy to hit yourself, but not in a way that feels unfair. I'd say this whole thing is still a bit too janky for it to be used in a mod that aims to feel vanilla, but I could see this being used in a Kaizo mod, for example. Anyways, when it comes to actors that don't damage the player but do damage enemies, there is one perfect candidate that I also talked about in the short, which is the fireworks produced by Babooms. When a Baboom ignites, the actor called Enemy Hanabihe spawns a child actor called Bullet of Hanabi, which produces the fireworks effect. So if we rename the Bullet of Hanabi actor to Bullet Shabon, that makes the bubble flower shoot fireworks. But this is where I originally ran into a rather annoying issue, which is that the fireworks didn't actually damage anything. When spawned by Babooms, this stuff kills enemies and even destroys blocks, but when spawned as a part of a power-up, nothing. Thankfully, recently Hagemaker figured out why this was happening, or rather why this wasn't happening. See, after enemy Hanabihe spawns Bullet of Hanabi as its child actor, Bullet of Hanabi in turn spawns its own child actor called Bullet Blast to create the collision of the explosion that actually damages stuff. So the reason the fireworks didn't damage anything when created as a part of the power-up is because this Bullet Blast actor wasn't being created alongside it. which makes sense because the game has no way of knowing that the fireworks needs a child actor to function, since it thinks this is actually the bubble actor. So clearly this method of renaming the actor to Bullet Shabon is inherently flawed when it comes to things that require child actors to function. Therefore, the solution HageMaker came up with was to go into the player's child actor parameters and change which file name the player actor looks for when it tries to spawn a bubble. This means the game knows which actor it's loading when spawning the power-up projectile, making it also produce child actors when necessary. So through this method, it's easy to make a functioning fireworks power-up. This ability produces vertical projectiles that go through terrain and damage or defeat enemies and destroy tiles. I suppose in some ways it's very similar to the Super Flower Pot in Wonder Switch 2 edition. For the sake of completing the illusion, I changed Mario's outfit colors to a bluish purple, since I associate fireworks as a whole with purple, but these projectiles are always blue. Though honestly, after all the hassle, I don't think this thing ended up being as usable as I would have liked. In the original game, babooms and their fireworks projectiles are only used in sections that are designed around them, but in any old level segment, this ability often isn't very useful because the attack only affects stuff directly above you. Comparing it to the Super Flower Pot again, although its projectile also travels upwards, it can still be used to fend off enemies up close as well. But it's hard to make this slow and exclusively vertical fireworks feel anywhere near as useful. However, after coming to that conclusion, I found a different projectile swap that actually works way better in almost every way. Remember how I talked about newer Super Mario Bros. Wii's hammer suit, and how its creators used specifically the version of the hammer actor made to be spat out by Yoshi? Well, that's obviously because that actor variation flips the normal projectiles functionality on its head by making it only damage enemies and not players, which thus circumvents the problem I discussed earlier. Now, sadly, in Super Mario Bros. Wonder, when Yoshi spits out a hammer, that's still the same actor as the Hammer Bro version. And either way, making the Bubble Flower spawn hammers doesn't really work, since the player parent actor doesn't know how to transfer the correct type of momentum data to the hammer child actor. But hammers aren't the only thing Yoshi can spit out in this game. What about bones? Because, as opposed to the hammer, this actor only appears in a form where it damages enemies and not the player, it has the correct type of interactivity by default. So, after changing the player's child actor parameters to spawn enemy Charon Bone, there we go, this thing works like a charm. The projectiles move in the direction they're shot at, travel really quickly, go straight through terrain, and of course damage enemies. Now, there are some oddities. Doing a spin jump makes both bones move in the same direction for some reason, and it's very easy to spam a bunch of projectiles and run alongside them in a way that feels overpowered. But still, who knew that arguably the first somewhat usable custom Super Mario Bros. Wonder power-up would be, Bone Mario? I would have liked to try making this power-up look like a skeletal version of Mario to match, but the Bubble Flower version of Mario uses the same model file as his normal appearance, so that's impossible. Therefore, I ended up just making him grey. To finish off this video, one thing I want to emphasize is that there should theoretically be a lot more we can do using this technique. For example, what I haven't shown off throughout this video is that messing with the individual attributes of the projectile actors could make them much more functional. Just because normal spike balls damage the player doesn't mean it's impossible to maybe make a duplicate of the actor that doesn't do that. After all, I'm pretty sure making the hammer suit also required a lot of finagling with the game's code and actor configurations. The way I've explained that process in this video was probably an oversimplification. Something else worth considering is that we can mess with the visuals of projectiles. For example, it's easy for me to make a duplicate of the bone actor that uses a boomerang model instead, and here we go, we have the world's jankiest boomerang suit. So I guess my point is that the future is wide open when it comes to potential custom Super Mario Bros. Wonder power-ups, and that's pretty exciting. Speaking of which, if you have any suggestions for what actors I should use to make more funky power-ups like these, maybe let me know by leaving a comment. While you're down there, maybe also consider leaving a like, subscribing, checking out my Discord server linked in the description, or signing up for a YouTube channel membership to support the channel and get early access to upcoming videos. Thank you so much for watching, and bye bye!